Okay, in about 40 or so minutes time, we're going to go into a panel session here looking at the experiences of different communities in wildfire preparedness and learning from each other. Before we do that, we're going to go into an NWT Wildfire Retrospective. We have with us from ECC Wildfire Management Analyst Brent Starling, who's been doing that for the past 15 years or so. He's also been a volunteer firefighter in Fort Smith for the past 20 or so. Please welcome Brent Starling with a fire retrospective for the NWT.
All right, thanks, Ollie. Can everybody hear me? No? Okay. If you heard me, you'd say yes. So, do it well. We're going to talk in the next 40 minutes really quickly about history of fire management in the NWT, a little bit about our current policy and past policies, how we manage wildfires, and then understanding natural fire regimes, because we always hear that the climate is changing and we need to adapt the way we manage fires and the way we build our fuel breaks around communities. So we're going to touch in a little bit on fire regimes, and then I'm going to go through a few personal lessons that I've learned in the last 15 years, 40 years growing up here in the north. So from 1900 to 1950, before Europeans came over, there was a ton of indigenous burning going on, right? They were burning for clearing land, travel corridors, insects, you clear off a pile of grass. So they were burning a lot. And when the Europeans came over, they were using a lot of this timber for their steamboats, right? So they had fire rangers and people that came through and said, no, that burning is bad. We don't like it. So the indigenous people said, well, we've been doing this forever. Why do we have to stop? So in 1900 to 1920, the Dominion Forestry Branch covered the Yukon, NWT, Northern Alberta, and Saskatchewan, right? So you can see up here kind of in the area where it was, and it was limited to the major waterways because there's no roads, right? And they needed steamboats. So some bad fire years in the 30s, and notably in 1942, there was a cry for more action in the Dominion zone. Sorry, excuse me. So, and they created the Mackenzie District in the Northwest Territories and Yukon. And one fire in particular in the bottom left, you can see it here. When they were building the Alaska Highway, a slash pile lit on fire that they were burning, and it burned up and burnt 7 million hectares. Okay, so it started in northern BC, ripped up through the Liard area. Thank you. And jumped the Mackenzie River near Fort Simpson. So when we hear, oh, we've never seen fires like this on the landscape before. Well, yeah, we have. In 1942, it happened, right? So as a number of problem fires kept growing, Forest and Wildlife Division, the NWT, was created in 46, right? And in the early 50s, there was a ton of money being spent on suppression. And having worked in the wildfire business for 15 years, we were in the business of, like, it's expensive fighting fires. And it's kind of nice to hear that even in the 50s, they were saying, okay, hold up. How can we do this better? How can we do this more efficient? Right? So a fire near Point Neus, which is on the Slave River north of Smith, right in here, burnt over 50 kilometers and threatened Fort Smith. So when we hear that fire hasn't done this before, it has. And it happens, as we'll see, on a kind of a regular cycle. So keep in mind, all the decisions to fight these fires were made in Ottawa at this time. So this is back in what we call the Fed days, right? So in 1959, the Mackenzie Forest Service was formed, and they started putting up fire towers, fighting fire with aircraft, getting crews organized, and getting more of a suppression attitude instead of just don't start fires, right? So in 1971, let's back it up. The late 60s and 70s saw more problem fires. So here we're in a new decade. Here we're seeing more problem fires again. And a fire in 1968 almost took out the town of Inuvik, right? So some folks like to say, oh, Inuvik doesn't get fires, it's fine. Well, when they get fires, holy man, do they get fires. Sun doesn't go down there for like a month, right? So yeah, they get fires. In 68, town almost burnt down. So a new department name is the Northwest Lands and Forest Service. Okay, and the policymakers in Ottawa came up with the new priority zone. So instead of we're going to protect a resource, now they're talking about protecting zones. Okay, so it kind of focused on the primary and secondary attack zones near communities and along waterways, right? Zone 3, wildlife and trapping area, because the fur trade was still going strong, and then Zone 4 was just kind of everything else. So in the mid-70s, the cost of fighting fire was reaching all-time highs, probably not compared to 2023, but for the mid-70s, kind of getting out of control a little bit. So folks in Ottawa said, nope, we're not fighting fire in Zone 3 anymore. Just Zone 1 and Zone 2, that's it. And that didn't really sit well with a lot of territorial residents and the territorial government. So in 79, in 79, they started working on the new policy, right? So let's look at my notes really quick. There's a new policy enacted in 83, right? So we're 2 years later. Sorry, I don't do math. And the policy was simplified to attack zones and observation zones. Okay, so you can see on our map, we have attack zones around communities, major highways, and observation zones, right? So before I go any further, I just wanted to make sure that we understand that all through from the 1900s to now, we've never fought every fire in the Northwest Territories. We don't have the people, we don't have the resources, we don't have the budget. Every fire, we hear sometimes, well, we used to fight every fire. No, false. We would fight every fire in Fire Attack Zone 1 if we had enough people. Some years we don't, right? So we just want to reiterate the point that the GNWT and back pre-devolution has never fought every fire. They haven't had resources, people, aircraft, or the budget to do that. So moving forward, in 1987, fire management was transferred to the GNWT. And they used, there we go. We switched in 1990. It took 3 years to develop our values at risk policy, and this is the policy we still use today. So 3 years meeting with Indigenous groups, community leaders, industry, and stakeholders to develop the policy we're using today. And it's called the Value at Risk Policy. So it did away with the notion of attack zone and observation zone. What we do now is we have our policy and it looks at land use objectives. It looks at protecting human life. It says that fire is recognized as a significant and natural phenomenon, and I would argue that fire is a value on the landscape. If we suppress every fire, we're removing a value from the landscape. We need fire to clean it up, reduce our fuels, and start that succession clock back at zero. The current fire policy also draws upon local and traditional knowledge. And we talked a little bit this morning about different structure protection equipment. And some folks were like, well, how come we haven't seen this? And it goes back to our ECC staff should be in the communities, having our meetings, doing consultation, talking to people, introducing them to new equipment, hearing what they're seeing out on the land, because it's in our policy that the way we manage fires should draw upon local and traditional knowledge. So that's kind of another huge one. So what happens when we oversuppress fire? If we remove fire from the landscape, if we remove that value, what happens? Our fuels build up. This is a picture of a mountain. It's not in the Northwest Territories, but it shows what we're talking about. It's a picture in the early 1900s. And if that's what a natural, healthy fire regime in this area, I think it's Banff, looks like. If we suppress every fire in 80 years, it's going to look like this, right? If we're tasked with managing a fire in the picture on the right, when it gets up and rolling, forget it. We're not putting it out. Or sorry, you're right, my left. It's going, right? This one, just so we're all clear. If we're fighting fire in this fuel type, not so bad, right? Because the fires rip through, less intensity, we don't nuke the bush, right? So when we oversuppress, we build up fuel. Also, we need fire to come through because the bush depends on it, right? So how many people have been walking through the bush and they see a picture or a tree with a big cat face scar on it like that, right? Fire went through, left that scar. It didn't kill the tree. So here we have tree ring analysis, and we've been doing this research up here for a few years. And this one is a Doug fir, but you can see it started growing in 1818. 1884 was the first fire that came through. Didn't kill the tree. 1906, second fire that came through. 1922, third fire that came through. So that fire is low intensity, surface burn, doesn't kill every tree. Like we've seen in 2023 with our bush around the communities that were evacuated, every tree is gone. It's called nuked. It's just toasted because the fuels have been allowed to build up for far too long because we've removed fire from the landscape. So then someone came and cut that thing down after it survived 3 fires and analyzed the tree rings. And we can say the average fire return interval is 35 years. So if you're 70 years old and you've been living in the same spot where that tree was cut down, you should have seen fire rip through twice in your lifetime. But how often do we see fire even come close to our communities? What do? We put it out, right? So we need fire on the landscape. And that's one thing that our policy now recognizes. Fire is a value. Boy, this clicker doesn't. There we go. Okay, so here we have, these maps are also put up in the back of the room if you want to look at them later. So this is a map, NWT fire history from 1965 to 2000. So you can see there's some pretty big fires, right? We just went through kind of a brief history of the different management styles, more or less, management policies. And you can see where the Mackenzie River goes up, there's a lot of fires that were suppressed there. Okay, in 1994, 1996, it's a very active region. I grew up in Fort Smith, so it's very active just northeast of Fort Smith. And we just learned that in 1987, they said, okay, we're gonna change things from attack zone and observation zone to value at risk. So they kind of stopped fighting a bunch of fires up there. But in 94, 95, 96, my mom and dad had a fishing lodge right up on this lake here. And when I was 12, we were hunting caribou, and with some folks from Chip, I think, can't remember. Anyway, the caribou would come in from the barren lands and eat and overwinter in the trees and then go back up. And I remember just as a kid, really young, there were some folks and they were like, whoa, look at their stomachs. They're black, because they had to come through all that burn. And, as a kid, you're like, okay, whatever. But now looking back and knowing the history, and, you as a kid, you're like, well, why don't you fight every fire? You don't understand. But the fire managers at the time were trying to make the best decision for the information they had, right? So now, with the state of the caribou, would they have made a different decision? I don't know. I can't speak for them. But moving on, 1965, why aren't we moving? There we go. To 2010. 2009 was one of the slowest fire seasons in history. And it was one of the seasons that I didn't work for ECC. As a summer student, I worked for the tankers. Summer of 2009, I went and worked for fisheries at a Hay River just to try something different. And it was the slowest season on history, so it was perfect. It worked out great for me, not for people working for ECC. But you can see there's not a whole pile added to this map in the next 10 years, right? So it's not just like one season, it's bad. It goes in a cycle. It takes a few years to get bad and then to get better. So in 2014, how many folks remember 2014? Yeah, so 2014, you can see there's a pile of red on that map. The major difference between 2014 and 2023 were these fires were kind of out in the middle of nowhere. They weren't really close to communities, right? Here, yeah, we have a 1 million hectare fire, but Fort Providence is here, Betchco's up here. It got a little close to Betchco, but it just did its own thing kind of out in the middle of nowhere almost, right? So, what am I forgetting about 2014? Nothing. And in 2017, because we're going to 2020, our fire season in Fort Smith, our fire season, was about 2.5 to 3 weeks long. We had 5 or 6 fires that started northeast of Smith, kind of in this area. And we were going gangbusters, putting up sprinklers, igniting from cabins, having air tankers, bombing around cabins, putting retardant lines, and we'd burn off of them. It was insane. And then it just rained again. So sometimes your fire season literally lasts 2.5 weeks, right? But in those 2.5 weeks, we had over 40 sprinkler kits deployed. We had crews from all over the place. We learned a lot about ignition and burning around values. We had helicopters going everywhere, and we still were losing cabins in the bush. And really, we were the only place in the territory that was busy. But what I want to get to is in those 2.5, 3 weeks, the wind didn't go below 40 kilometers an hour, pretty much. It was up 70, 80 during the day. Fires were ripping. We had folks that were working with the department for 35 plus years. Oh no, that fire is not going to get there later. And yeah, it did. So we learned a lot in 2017 in those 2.5 to 3 weeks. And we all know what happened in 2023 and 2024. But what's really interesting and what really caught my eye about the fire seasons in 2023 and 2024, if you look around Hay River, right? Historically, yeah, we put fires out there. because it's right close to Hay River. But from the highway, Samba Cay, this area, if you back it up, right from 65 to 2020, almost no fires. That's not because of suppression, because we wouldn't fight fires out there. It's just they didn't occur there until everything lined up perfect. And in 2 years, that whole area was wiped out or set back to zero. And I kind of talk about that because when we talk about community defense, community protection, fuel breaks, fuel treatment, we need to realize that this is going to happen literally every 10 to 12 years. We can look right back to 1930, right? And say, yeah, in 68, Inuvik was threatened. In the early 80s, Fort Smith was threatened. My mom and dad moved up in 79 when they were having my brother in 81. That's when my mom was like, I'm not living here. We have a brand new baby. I can't get out of town. The highway's closed. We're getting evacuated by boat. What is this? Anyway, they stayed. And so, but does that sound familiar with 2023 when we had 7 communities evacuated, right? So it's not that, oh, we've never seen this before. Well, maybe this individual person hasn't seen it before, but it's happened in the bush, and it happens every 10 or 15 years. So when we build our community defenses, when we build our fuel breaks, when we do our hazard reduction burns, we need to keep these fire years in mind to say, yeah, when that thing's coming, we better have some good fuel break set up, because you can't reduce the wind. The wind's going to do what the wind's going to do. If you're living at the top of a hill, well, that's your problem. But you can't change topography. The only thing we can change is fuel, right, of that fire behavior triangle. So we kind of better get on it. I think that's pretty much my time. There you are. 2 more minutes. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, if we had time, when I started my career 15-ish years ago, my manager, Rick, would send me out to do these flights way out to Nunavut and back. And they were the best thing ever, because you go out and you fly and you look at fires. And we'd always fly over these places and you go, well, what happened here? There's nothing there. It's just moonscape. And then you fly a little further towards tree line and then there's more trees. And it only clicked in after Salt Mountain burnt, which is right outside of Fort Smith, that it was a short interval, high intensity reburn happened out there. But it was undocumented and no one really paid attention to it because it's 200 miles from town, right? But there's some folks that are like, oh, we've never seen the bush burn with high intensity, and then less than 15 years later, it burns again with high intensity or high severity. Well, guess what? That's been happening too. We just haven't really clued in. I hadn't clued in. I'm sure there's people that have seen it and are like, oh yeah, it happens all the time. But we're seeing it again last year up in here north of Kakiza Lake, right? The fire's chugging through a 12-year-old burning it right down to nothing. There's no timber left. It's right down to the grass, or sorry, the sand. And it'll be interesting to see what comes back. I'm sure that if the bison get in there, they'll like it. But good.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good. Does there?
Yeah, we'll take some questions if you're open to them. Are there any questions from anyone in the audience for Brent? I got one to start off with. I just want to ask you. You just mentioned the high intensity, the short interval reburns. Is there a way to display those on a map like that? Are you thinking of a way to show when that happens? Do we care about displaying it and tracking it that way?
Could be, for sure. You can look at your fire history map from 10 to 15 years ago and your fire history map from today. And if there's an overlap, probably going to have a short interval, high severity reburn, right? Because severity is what the fire leaves behind, whereas intensity is what it's doing, how hot it is, right? So you have your high severity, it's gonna burn all of your duff, your roots, your stumps, all that kind of thing. So I believe there are people researching it. It's really interesting. And the word they're kind of using is like biome shift, right? That's your question.
Yeah, and to you, how important is that as a development, as something that's changing on the landscape that we need to be aware of or consider a factor right now?
To me,
Yeah.
I think it's something to be cognizant of, and it's something that we need to watch, because it, in my day-to-day life in the summer, it means fires, they're going to be a heck of a lot more dangerous because the trees are going to be falling over, roots are compromised, and it's going to be a heck of a lot harder to put out. So that's why I would care about it. To a community standpoint, they might care about it because they're going to have this moonscape outside of their community. So they may not like that, but typically when that happens, though, there's not a whole lot we can do to stop it.
Questions?
More of a comment, and thank you for your presentation. So I'm working with Forest Resources in Hay River. One of the first things I did a couple years ago is I went on a visit. There was some research happening around Checkpoint, and ECCC was looking at those cookies, just like what you showed with the Douglas fir. And one of the interesting thing was, yeah, we were killing trees to see the fire return interval, and we were finding some jack pine with 4 fire return intervals. So,
and it was about 35 years.
I don't know. I can put you in contact with the people that do know. But yeah, very similar to what you were showing. There is an actual territorial context because Douglas fir is quite a bit further south, but actually happens up here too.
Thank you very much. Questions? Okay, we got a few to get to. I'm going to come over here and then I'm going to come over there.
Mine's real quick. Where can we access the fire history maps that you're showing in your presentation?
You can email us at Fire Center, and there's the 1965 to 25 up at the back. I can give you a card and put you in contact with our GIS person, and they can email them out.
Perfect. Thanks.
Yeah.
And Sarah from NWT just said the presentations will be up online as well, so you'll be able to grab the presentation. Or you could just wait till the end of the day, wait till the end of Friday, steal the maps. Because they're probably not going to need them after Friday. Just take them, they're yours. That's what I was going to do, so I'm just saying. We had a question over here.
Hi, I should have introduced myself the last time when I asked about liability and litigation. It's David Heron, alias Yogi, 52 summers doing this type of work. And this is the first time in my career I've always begged for it to upper management to see this many people, especially the volunteer people from the fire departments, willing to get together and do some community preparedness to work out protection plans and everything. But Brent's referring to reburns. West of Fort Smith, we had a reburn after 14 years. And I thank God that that tight pine forest was there. It wasn't very tall. It was like a huge grass fire. So we used that 14-year-old growth to turn a massive fire that was coming out of huge old growth in Wood Buffalo Park. So sometimes when it's like a reburn, people said it looks like a moonscape. I have pictures a year later now. That forest is totally rejuvenated because that's what pine does. And people, especially in this room here, we're going to see a lot of people take information out of this room. And there's a lot of experienced people. I'm looking over at a couple on my right here. But, let's work together. Let's not fight together. We got to this level. Let's go forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe just time for one or two more if we've got any other questions in the room. Mickey? It's your workshop. You might as well get one or two in, eh?
I got lots of questions. So I was just interested in your mentioning about the traditional knowledge and how it's in your policy to start developing ways to integrate it into some of the practices, the training, the actions, the strategies. So do you have any comments on how your group is taking steps to explore how to do that?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, fire managers, forest officers should be getting out into the regions, talking to people and saying, hey, this is what fire's done in the last 5 years, last 10 years. Are there areas, cultural areas we may not know about, which you would want us to protect? In Fort Providence, like we're talking about doing some prescribed burning in the meadows like they used to do 20, 30 years ago, right? So we're meeting with the community to say, hey, let's do some more burning to give the bison better food to eat outside of the community, so they're drawn outside. And in the fall, we burn in the community, so there's nothing to eat, so they don't overwinter there. You know, various things like that. Does that answer your question? It should be ongoing all the time. It should be. Or your manager of forest or forest officer.
Call someone else. Got it.
Call me and I'll put you in contact with the...
Okay, we got one last question at the back over here. Coming.
Yeah, my name's Arthur Beck. I'm from Fort Resolution. I'm a traditional knowledge holder, trapper, fisherman, you name it. I have a lot of experience firefighting. You have a good presentation. However, you got a lot to learn too. Every country burns different. When you fire is really good, yes, in certain areas where you have soil. Then green grass comes back, it's good for the buffalo, good for the rabbits, good for certain things. But when you go east of Tolson River into the Barrenlands, all the way to the Barrenlands, there's rock country. There's no soil. So when the fire passes through that area way down there by Badar and all that, you see that yellow, you see right at the bottom, right over there.
Yep.
That's what I'm talking about. That's rock country. There's no soil. Once a fire passes through, it's just ashes. Nothing grows in ashes. And it takes 50 years for lichen to mature so the caribou stomach could digest it. So it's not good for the caribou. The grandfather's beard that hangs on the trees, that caribou eat that. The caribou moved because there's no food. That's the reason the caribou moved. Plus industry, zone of influence, all that combined. That's what steered our caribou away. Sure, it's good for buffalo. It's good for us, but not all animals benefit from fires. You need to do a little more research. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, thanks, Arthur, sorry.
Final call, just as I make my way back to the stage for anyone else who wants to make a comment, has a question. I think, Brent, we can let you off at that point. Brent, thank you very much for your presentation. We appreciate it.